How's it, everybody? Welcome back to the Fontainer. So it's the end of the summer transfer window. The window shut yesterday evening at 7 p.m. As expected, it was a very, very eventful one for Newcastle fans. The end of the Alexander Isak saga. We knew late on Sunday night, very late, that Newcastle had accepted a bid. And we knew that when we woke up on Monday morning that it was going to be the story of the day, and indeed it turned out to be so. So, the big will he, won't he, was eventually answered over the last 48 hours. Alexander Isak is officially a Liverpool striker. He's got the number 9 shirt. A summer's worth of will he, won't he, complaining about him, talking about Liverpool tapping him up initially. I think we need to get into it. I think it's good to either summarize where we are at the moment, hopefully draw a line under it, although a couple of things which I'm going to talk about might mean that the story rumbles on a little bit more in terms of player power, in terms of him possibly underperforming, and obviously some of his teammates coming back on social media and supporting him publicly. So let's get into it. So Alexander Isak moved to Liverpool and Johan Visa came to Newcastle. The fee, as I said in my previous videos, if you look at the fee of 125 million, I think Liverpool underpaid what Newcastle wanted. That kind of magical number of 150, which was never officially affirmed by the club, was never going to be achieved. Everyone knew the 110 official bid and the 150 that Newcastle wanted, quote unquote, that the realistic number was going to be somewhere in the middle. I think 130 million or 135 would probably have felt as if Newcastle got fair market value. And I've spoken about fair market value a lot on my previous videos. And then obviously Newcastle going out and spending £55 million on a player who's going to be 29. Yes, he had a great season last season. This is Johan Visa at Brentford, but he's the new number 9. I think Newcastle have raised the floor of the quality on the club. We've got a lot of players out the door. I'm just going to go through a couple here. Obviously Sean Longstaff, if you think about Jacob Ramsey being his replacement, you could argue that is a slight improvement. Sean Longstaff did have that local boy feel in terms of everyone, the youngsters sitting in the stadium thinking, well, if he can do it, maybe I can do it. We obviously got potentially, 15 million, but 12 million up front for Sean Longstaff. Jacob Ramsey, hasn't set the world alight in his first couple of appearances. He picked up a knock as well against Leeds on the weekend. That's arguably an improvement. Lloyd Kelly going out as well. Malik Chow, you could say, is an improvement on that. The big one is Callum Wilson and Alexander Isak. Those two strikers. Can we say right here, right now, that Visa and Voltemade are an improvement? No, is my honest opinion. Anyone other than Alexander Isak was always going to be a downgrade. I think Newcastle kind of did the best what they could, considering who was dealing with the transfers. In terms of it being Steve Nixon, whose official job title is Chief Scout, and obviously Andy Howe, whose official title is the Assistant Head of First Team Recruitment. So these are the guys who are going into boardrooms, speaking to players' agents, speaking to the players, speaking to the other clubs' representatives, doing the negotiating. And let's be honest with you, this is not what their actual day-to-day job is. So I think this is why we've not got the fee that we wanted for Alexander Isak, and it's also why it feels like we've possibly overpaid for Nick Voltemade, in the region of £69 million, and obviously massively overpaid for Johan Visa. Let's just be honest with each other. Newcastle have massively overpaid for Johan Visa at £55 million. If he comes and scores 20 league goals in the season, I'll raise my hands up and say it's money well spent. But I don't see that being the case, considering we've got Champions League this season as well, and what that's going to take out of the squad's legs this coming season. So I obviously hope that I'm wrong, and hope both players score 20 league goals, but that's obviously highly unlikely, but not impossible. I do not want to skirt over the issue. I think a lot of the rhetoric and a lot of the narrative which Newcastle fans need to be banging on about is the void between the ownership and the management, which is obviously the CEO and the sporting director. This is something we need to bang on about, because if we need to learn any lessons from this summer window, it's the fact that we didn't have those two positions. Massively hampered us in terms of our timing, in terms of speaking to players, agents, or players or other clubs in terms of recruitment, and then obviously on finances as well, in terms of getting the best deal possible for Newcastle United. Every penny counts in the PSR world. We can't afford to be spending 5 million too much on players here, there, and everywhere. It all adds up, and it's going to bite us in the backside at some stage. Going back to Alexander Isak, something that I thought a lot when the media, or when the news eventually broke out, and you can see him in the Liverpool kit at the Liverpool training centre, was that the guy seemed knackered. He seemed absolutely shattered. And we all know that this is not a physical tired, because he hasn't broken a sweat over the last 6 weeks. He hasn't trained. He hasn't played any games. You can tell that the guy mentally was absolutely shattered. You could see it in his face in terms of, Alexander Isak is someone who we always thought about with that massive smile, those big white teeth, scoring a goal, joking around. And he didn't seem that jovial Alexander Isak that we grew to love over the last 3 years. When he officially released his statement saying that, he's happy to be at Liverpool and is excited to win things and he wants to get back to work, there was obviously a bit of an uproar at the fact that there was no mention at all towards Newcastle in terms of his teammates, in terms of his manager, in terms of people at Newcastle, the training staff, and obviously, first and foremost, none of the fans. Absolutely no mention of the fans. Newcastle then responded with, I think it was a 37-word comment. Basically, it's just like a professional reference saying, yeah, we can confirm that Alex left. We signed him for 63 million, and he made 109 appearances in total. That's it, full stop. No kind of thank you, no goodbye. And I think something which did bug me at the time was that the narrative was very much about Newcastle's statement and how it was very short and sweet and very to the point, with no, shall we say, love lost in that message. You can read between the lines. It did also annoy me very much that when Sky News was speaking to Keith Downey, they then panned behind him at the stadium, and that somebody showed that picture of Isak is a rat, Visa is a Geordie, to kind of show something like that is a bed cover that somebody's crassly written on. We don't know who did it. We don't know if it was a Newcastle fan. We don't know if it was a Sunderland fan. We don't know if it was Peter Pan. We don't know who did that. So I don't think you should credibly be showing signs if you can't validate the source. It does go back to what journalism seems like at the moment, in terms of just throwing something out there and letting fans argue about it. But I think that was very irresponsible of Sky Sports to do that, and also to kind of twist the narrative and say, oh, look at how short Newcastle's message was, when in fact it was Alexander Isak who first sent his message with no reference to Newcastle at all. But that was yesterday, and today is today, and Alexander Isak has come out with a statement. I'll put it up there for you to see. He has said, I want to express gratitude to my teammates, the staff, and above all, the city of Newcastle and the amazing supporters for the 3 unforgettable years we shared together. Together we have written history and brought the club to the place where it truly belongs. It has been an honour to be part of the journey from reaching the Champions League to winning the first trophy in over 70 years. Forever grateful, thank you, Newcastle. So, when you look at that statement, I think this is a lot of what Alexander Isak was feeling probably from winter, possibly going back to last summer. But I think there's a lot of news stories coming out at the moment that there was rumblings going on behind the scenes way before, in terms of him not wanting to play, that the conversation actually started last summer. We know that that was the case with Mitchell not wanting to give him an improved contract, and somebody just being very disgruntled and in his workplace. And it's very difficult when you've got the world watching every move that you make, reading into his body language and, oh, he missed a sitter there, and there's a lot of talk that people are saying that he downed tools, in particular after the Carabao Cup final victory against Liverpool, and saying, okay, well, that's, that box ticked, and that he purposely didn't want Newcastle to get into the Champions League, and that's why he was purposely underperforming. I mean, you could say that about any player's performance any weekend. I mean, maybe it's that I don't want to believe that this could possibly happen in this day and age in terms of a player purposely underperforming. If it turns out to be true, we're never going to know. Isak's never going to come out and say, yeah, of course, for the last couple of games, I didn't want Newcastle to qualify for the Champions League and therefore strengthen my negotiating position in terms of why I should leave the club because you can't offer me Champions League football. This is something that we can argue about, on social media, online, or at the pub. But in reality, we're never going to know. If you think that he did underperform, I think that's, you can look at certain games and think, I think the Crystal Palace game, he massively didn't have a good game there, and it didn't really seem on par with how he performed earlier on in the season. In particular, if you look at the semi-finals, for example, of the Carabao Cup, and obviously scoring the winner. I think this is probably just a little bit of hurt coming out and people trying to deal with it in a way of looking back and thinking, it's just a way of dealing with the hurt at the moment, and I think that will subside over time if Nick Voltemade starts banging goals and Visa hits the ground running. Alexander Isak will become a memory, and very much like Pape Cisse was, or Demba Ba or Loic Remy. These are all strikers which were really, really good at Newcastle, but then wanted to leave for bigger and better clubs or for pay at the time. So it's still very raw at the moment. I think people can't get out of their minds the fact of him celebrating that winning goal at the Carabao Cup final, and in terms of him going on that incredible scoring run last season. Let's not forget, Isak was the first Newcastle player to score in 8 consecutive Premier League appearances, beating the 7-match streak from Shearer and obviously Joe Willock back in 2021. So, in summary, I don't think, if you look at Isak's celebration in the Carabao Cup final, it seemed very real to me. His celebration afterwards with the crowd lifting the trophy up seemed very real to me. I think a lot of it had to do with his agent pushing for him to move. Yes, of course, if you are a player at that level and you get an offer from Liverpool and you get an offer to stay at Newcastle, if you're looking to double your salary, if you're looking to add trophies, we know that with Harry Kane, that was a big deal for him in terms of why he eventually left Spurs. If most Newcastle fans are honest, if we're all honest with each other, no one blames him for wanting to leave. The big issue that everyone has was how he managed it. And this goes on to the topic which is very hot at the moment regarding player power. The two biggest instances that were over this transfer window were Isak and Visa, both of them unfortunately involving Newcastle. The unfortunate comparative opposite is Mark Gahey for Crystal Palace. He didn't get his move to Liverpool. The difference is that you have Isak, who refused to train, refused to play, spat out his dummy on social media, and you got Mark Gahey, who did the complete opposite, went to training, played a game, scored a cracking goal at the weekend as well, and he didn't get to go. And I think the worry is, and the talk is well, is this going to become normal now, where if players wish to move, they just literally sit at home, fold their arms and say, I'm not playing anymore, go onto social media and say that I had a verbal agreement with XYZ. This is something which is going to be interesting, and for us to keep an eye out. A lot of Newcastle fans are thinking, if Isak does what he wants to do at Liverpool, and in the next 2 years Real Madrid or Barcelona come knocking, he's going to do exactly the same thing. Of course he's going to. This has happened over and over in football. Think Cristiano Ronaldo at Man United. Think Luis Suarez and Philippe Coutinho. It happens all the time, and it's going to continue happening. It's just what's different now is the social media world we're living in terms of the players using social media and using online journalists, and then fans reacting to it as well on social media, and that's having an impact on the club and at board level. What's come out is that Anthony Gordon and Sven Botman have both publicly said goodbye and thank you, and you're my brother and all the best, blah 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 blah. And then very evidently there's a group of players that haven't sent anything. So most notably Joe Linton and Bruno, the captain of Newcastle. There is talk about some players in the dressing room sympathising with Alexander Isak. I think the big one is Anthony Gordon, who was supposed to be going to Liverpool towards the end of last season. I don't really have a view on it. I mean, at the end of the day, different strokes for different folks. Some people liked Alexander Isak, and were massively close friends with him. Some people weren't. You can't account for every single relationship and expect people to be robotic and have a single-minded view. Personally, I don't mind it so long as it doesn't spill out into performance-related issues or creates more rifts. There is strong talks that Bruno is going to have a big team meeting when everybody comes back from the international break, just to kind of draw a line under this. I think that'll send a very good message to the new incomings of the club to say, look, this is the direction we're going in. We need everybody rowing in the right direction. We've got a long season ahead. Let bygones be bygones. Move on. There's no point stewing about this now. We've got a big season ahead of us, and in particular, as I said, for the new signings, I think it's important to kind of set that tone in terms of how we want to move forward. We are 3 games into the Premier League season, and we've already dropped points as well, so we need to play catch up a little bit already. So let's summarise the transfer window for Newcastle. It is the most that Newcastle have ever spent in a transfer window. I think that tells you that we kind of knew that money was coming in. The big one, obviously, is that Newcastle broke their transfer record in the shape of Nick Voltemade for 69 million. We always need to be slightly careful when you talk about figures, because there's guaranteed figures. So Voltemade, for example, is 65 million, and that raises to 69 depending on certain clauses being met, whether he scores X amount of goals, or has X amount of appearances, or wins X amount of man of the matches. We don't know. These are all confidential clauses. Some of them do sometimes come out into the public domain. For the sake of this, I'll talk about fees, which include the add-ons as well. The next biggest signing was Anthony Elanga on the right wing from Nottingham Forest, a player who's currently with Isak training at the Sweden squad. That was 55 million. We got Malik Choud, 30 million. Ramsey for 43 million. Johan Wiese, as we said, for 55. Ramsdale on loan. The total spend for Newcastle was £240 million. How would I rate Newcastle's transfer window? I would give it a B-. If Newcastle had kept Alexander Isak and added a quality second striker and got the right wing and the central midfielder and the central defender, and maybe done something with a goalkeeper, we'd be saying A-. I think the big thing was keeping the star players. We haven't managed to do that. Darren Neils did say a couple of years ago that Newcastle were always going to have to play a trade if we wanted to do things in the transfer window. in terms of getting a huge bulk of money in and then spending money out, but then spreading that over a couple of years. That's the only way to beat PSR. I agree with him to a certain extent, but I think if we increased our stadium to a 80,000, 70,000 seater, that is a legitimate way to beat PSR. So let's hope we hear something about that in the near future. I am going to be knocking on the door to see if I can get an update on that. In terms of the other outgoings, Lloyd Kelly, Dubravka, Longstaff, Wilson, eventually Jamal Lewis left, Isaac Hayden left as well. One of the many goalkeepers we had went on loan, and obviously Matt Target went on loan to Middlesbrough as well. Newcastle recruit about 160 million, possibly rising to 163 million. So the net spend for Newcastle is roughly around the 98 million pound mark. As we know, current PSR rules is that you can lose 105 million pound in a calendar year, rolling over a 3-year period. Liverpool have spent 420 million pounds in this transfer window alone. And this smacks a lot of what Alex Ferguson used to do, was that whenever he won the Premier League, he would make sure that he strengthened again. And, when you're on top, you don't let up. That's when you increase the pressure and you go and pick the best player at a club which is underperforming, because that player wants to be winning trophies, etc., etc. It happened with Robin van Persie. It happened with Rio Ferdinand. It happened with Ruud van Nistelrooy. History tends to repeat itself. Liverpool are trying to create a dynasty. Mo Salah is not getting any younger, so they're looking towards the future. Liverpool won't be able to spend this amount of money every single transfer window. They did sell a lot of assets. Obviously, Darwin Núñez went. Luis Diaz went, who's doing brilliantly at Bayern Munich. Harvey Elliott has gone on loan to Aston Villa with an obligation to buy. They sold Kwanzaa as well for 35 million. So Liverpool's net spend was 229 million. They actually brought in 190 million pounds worth of player sales. So that is very excellent player trading. And that's something that Newcastle may have to get used to doing in the long term if the PSR rules stay as they are. So I know everyone's happy that the Isak drama is over, but I won't be surprised that if next summer, whether Jolinton, Bruno, Tonali, Gordon, Botman, one of the other big players gets spoken about in terms of a sale, and then we start raising the floor again just so that we have a better, wider squad who can compete on all fronts. But if we are going to be doing that, we need the right people, the competent people, we need qualified people in the right positions at Newcastle. For example, Liverpool's sporting director is Richard Hughes. Incidentally, he worked with Eddie Howe back in his Bournemouth days. If Newcastle want to progress, we've got to get the sporting director and CEO position covered, because going into the winter transfer window and going into the summer transfer window, getting into players' contracts, getting into players' contract extensions, or looking at loans. I know the transfer window is finished, but the work doesn't stop now. I know the transfer window is finished now, but Newcastle need to push on. We need to go and find a competent sporting director who can work with Eddie Howe, who's on the same page as Eddie Howe and PIF, and that everyone goes in the right directions. And you have PIF basically signing the checks, you have Eddie Howe concentrating on the team, and you have the sporting director and CEO doing the strategic vision and kind of long-term planning for Newcastle, whether it's stadium plans, whether it's a training ground, whether it's player contracts, etc. That shouldn't be within Eddie Howe's remit at all. So there's still work to do for Newcastle, but let's look back at this summer in terms of massive lessons learned. Let's draw a line under the Alexander Isak thing. I'll be really interested to hear what your views and thoughts are on Newcastle's summer. What do you think about our incomings? What do you think about our outgoings? What should be the next primary focus for the club? Thank you very much for your time. Help a guy out by hitting that like and subscribe button, and give us a comment on your views. And don't forget,